Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Leaders of Transformation podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen, and my passion and expertise is helping you create transformation in your life, in your business, in your relationships, and in the world around you. And every week I interview difference makers and world changers so you can be inspired and that your vision can be expanded in terms of the ways that you can create positive change in the world. And today we're going to talk with Lilly Woodbury.
Hello.
Woohoo! She is the regional coordinator and official spokesperson for Surfrider Canada. What a fun job to have. And she is chapter manager of the Surfrider Pacific Rim Chapter. She's appeared on Global BC, CTV, CBC, and numerous other broadcast news stations, weighing in on policy-driven solutions around plastic pollution and ocean conservation. Lilly, welcome. We're excited that you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you, Nicole. Finally, after many, many months of chatting.
Right? Yes, we've been planning this for a while, and so yeah, I'm excited to have you here. So talk to us about what Surfrider is, what it stands for, and kind of like what's your role in all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I'd love to recognize that I'm speaking from the traditional unceded territories of Channel First Nations on the west coast of Vancouver Island, just in case anyone isn't familiar with where Tofino and Ucluelet is. And I work for Surfrider.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful there.
Super beautiful. Super beautiful. If you don't know what it looks like, Google it. It's Hawaii of the North for sure. And Canada's surf capital. So pretty awesome. So I work for Surfrider Foundation, and our mission is the protection and enjoyment of the ocean, beaches, and waves for all people. And so we have 5 focus areas being coastal preservation, clean water, plastic pollution, ocean protection, and climate change. And so within that, I work for the Pacific Rim Chapter that works across the peninsula called the Pacific Rim, which bridges Tofino and Ucluelet and surrounding New Channel First Nation communities. And so within that umbrella of ocean protection, we really focus our efforts on addressing plastic pollution, of materializing a circular economy, as well as doing coastal restoration work. And all of that restoration work feeds data and insights into our campaigns that are working to address the root of plastic pollution and waste at the source. So we are a direct action organization. We're not, I think a lot of people think maybe we're just education focused or we just do beach cleanups, but we are direct action, and we are driven to win campaign victories, which is essentially a decision by a governing body that protects the coastal and ocean environment.
Fantastic. So how did you get involved in this?
It's a great question. I went to the University of Toronto and I graduated 6 years ago, which just feels wild. And at that time, I didn't have one course on plastic pollution. I hadn't, even thought about waste too much. There was a lot of information on ocean conservation being, in landlocked Toronto. And so when I came out to the West Coast, I started volunteering with a few different organizations, but I felt like they weren't necessarily investing in me too much as individuals. Like, I have so much to give. I know that I can really be a significant part of this movement. And so Surfrider Pacific Rim had kind of been inactive for a few years, and a new executive committee had come on board, and they're like, we're looking for new volunteers to address plastic pollution. And so I went out to their public meetup and met my mentor, Michelle, who's been one of the most amazing and powerful people in my life. And if you're watching this, you know her, then you know. And, after that night, she sent me this super long email, and I was like, whoa, this woman she really means business. And then from that point on, it was like I was in, and her and I and the rest of the volunteer crew really started building this chapter up. And now we're one of the biggest in North America. So I volunteered for about a year. And then in that time, I moved to New Zealand to work for Greenpeace as a campaigner. And then I got the job here and I moved on back.
Awesome. Well, you obviously have passion for this, and I got that right off the bat when we first spoke. And a little shout out actually to Nigel Bennett, because Nigel had you on his podcast. I think we met, and then I saw you actually being interviewed on Nigel's show on Impact. And you just did such a fantastic job. And I saw your passion, as I said, come shining through. So let's talk about the oceans. Let's talk about single-use plastic and the solutions that you are proposing, your organization is really working towards.
Yeah, so for folks who aren't too well aware of what plastic pollution is, plastics are a petroleum-based product. A lot of people don't know that, but they are fossil fuel derived, and they are an inorganic material that essentially is never going to degrade. It will never biodegrade in the natural environment. So what we have right now is this linear economic system where we are extracting fossil fuels, manufacturing plastics, and then since we don't have a closed loop on plastic materials called the circular economy, which I'll talk about later on, what's happening is that a vast majority of plastics, and in Canada, that's 89%, are ending up in landfills, they're getting incinerated, or they're ending up in the environment. And the oceans have become the most prominent sink for these plastics. So once plastics are in the ocean, they will not biodegrade, and they pose all kinds of threats to the oceanic environment, to marine life who become entangled in marine debris, including like fishing and aquaculture gear. That's the most common. It also breaks down into tiny pieces called microplastics, which, like, it's at this point we can't even clean them out of the oceans. It's next to impossible, and they're so small that even the building blocks of life, phytoplankton, are consuming them. And plastics also, unfortunately, have this absorbent ability. So they're able to absorb other types of chemicals in the ocean. So DDT, PCBs. And again, once those chemicals are in the plastics and they enter into the food chain, they biomagnify and bioaccumulate up the food chain into humans. So plastics in the ocean pose a great threat to all the marine life, the ocean ecosystems themselves, and also humans. But beyond ocean conservation in the singular sense, there's also a massive impact on climate change, as well as impact on justice for people. And those are all interconnected, like, plastic pollution, plastic manufacturing, it takes a lot of greenhouse gases. It produces a lot of greenhouse gases to manufacture plastics. And so it's contributing to carbon in the atmosphere, which is contributing to ocean acidification and warming. So it's all interconnected.
Well, it sounds to me like a huge issue and a huge problem. It almost is like, could be overwhelming in terms of how to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So what is the solution? And I wouldn't say quick and dirty solution, because there's probably not one, but what is the solution that we can work towards to be able to improve it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's so many solutions that need to be implemented. There's a whole suite that involve the public and private sectors. But to kind of give a glimpse into how we've approached it at Surfrider is that we have chapters that work in specific geographical areas. And those geographical areas have, their own unique issues when it comes to eradicating waste and pollution. So our chapter, working in Tofino Nucleate, what we've done is launch campaigns to eliminate single-use plastics. So we've banned plastic bags, straws, and now polystyrene foam takeaway containers. We are also now ready to ban plastic and bioplastic cutlery, as we've supported businesses in transitioning off of those items. And so we've been working to shift the culture on the ground here. And again, what I can talk about a little bit later on is really invest in individuals to increase their capacity as environmental leaders, working with the business community to help them become compliant and really hold them up as stewards of a commercial culture of stewardship, educate visitors, educate residents, and then go to our government to say, we've worked to shift this culture on the ground, we've worked to create this compliance, and then working with them to create those regulations and get those regulations in place. And then, all of the insight and data we gain at this local level from winning these campaigns, from our programs on waste, from all of our cleanups that give us data that far exceeds just single-use plastics. Single-use plastics are just one piece of the puzzle. As I mentioned before, even about 70% of what we collect is from the fishing and aquaculture industry. So we're able to take all of that and funnel that information upwards to the provincial and federal level of government to recommend a broader suite of policies needed. So again, most obvious is we need to ban single-use plastics, and it's a bit wild that we still haven't done that. It's like so long overdue, and it's the most simple thing that we can do, and there's so many alternatives. So we need that to happen. But beyond that, we also need to work towards a circular economy. So as I mentioned earlier, a circular economy moves beyond that narrative of this make, take, waste, and keeping things in a circular loop where the value of materials doesn't depreciate. You design waste and pollution out of your systems, you keep materials in use, and in the design of these systems, you ideally regenerate the natural environment. So in order to shift to a circular economy, there are quite a few different things that we need to do, and that includes scaling systems for refill and reuse. When you look at, there's like this thing called a butterfly diagram, and one day on this podcast you'll have holograms and the butterfly diagram will pop up for everyone. But essentially in this butterfly diagram, on the one side you have the technical nutrients, and on the most inner loop, the most inner loops are the ones that save the most water, the most energy, the most emissions. And so that most inner loop is reuse and refill, redistribution, where you don't have to keep making new items. You have your reusable water bottle, you have your reusable container, you go to bulk stores and you keep, filling those up with products and that way you completely design out plastic packaging. So that is a major part of what we need to do, is really scale those systems. And we've seen great examples with new refilleries, with Loop, which comes from the same company as TerraCycle. And beyond that, we also need to invest in systems for repair. So there's like a lot of planned obsolescence in our society. So you have your phone and then, a year later it's broken, you can't fix it, you have to get a new phone. Same with the toaster, same with, a whole panoply of items around your house. And so we need to have a repair manifesto so that people know how to fix their own goods, that we give people the access to be able to do that and keep their materials in use and not have to keep buying and buying and buying, which is, again, so much of the issue is this like unfettered consumerism. And so that's another big part of it. And then also refurbishment, being able to refurbish our goods and products. And then lastly, in terms of recycling, that's probably where most of our narrative is focused, is like, well, just improve recycling. But our recycling systems in Canada and the US and around the world are really quite broken. Out of all the loops I just talked about, recycling takes the most water, it takes the most energy, it creates the most emissions, because you have to break things, you have to break the items down into their like chemical building blocks to make new things. And, often with plastic products and packaging, they're only recycled 1 to 3 times before being sent to landfill. And as we know, most items aren't even being recycled. So what we are also proposing is to implement recycled content standards for products and packaging, so that it has to have a minimum of, let's say 25 to 50% recycled plastic. And so that will also create more of a domestic demand for that recycled plastic. And yeah, another one we are also really working towards is expanding extended producer responsibility regulations. So with EPR, have you heard of this one?
Mm-mm.
So it's a comprehensive strategy for working towards a circular economy that's already present in Canada and the US, but it's quickly become outdated, and we really need to expand it and make it more comprehensive. So what this means is that it puts responsibility back onto plastic producers to become responsible financially and operationally for the full life cycle of what they manufacture. So this will address the environmental burden of both consumers and industry, commercial, institutional-based waste, as well as the aquaculture fishing equipment that I talked about. So, right now, so much of the responsibility is just on individuals and it's on municipalities, which, it's not fair, because these products are not designed well. The packaging is not designed well to be recycled again. When you put in those EPR laws, it puts the responsibility onto the manufacturer to design it well so it can be recycled. They're going to want to design smarter with better materials. And again, it makes them accountable for cleanup and recycling, so we're not going to have the issues that we have. So those are just a few quick snapshot ones. I could go on all day about the different solutions needed, but it's needed at all levels of government, in businesses, in institutions, in big industry. It's really needed in all sectors of society, and we really need to work together to really turn the tide on this crisis.
Well, I think it's so crazy because it's actually in our best interest to do this.
Absolutely.
And it just takes a change in habit. But then, of course, habits, I mean, as a coach myself, I know that you can't just address habit and behavior modification, because if people don't understand why they want to do it and really understand the what's in it for me and why do I care, as selfish as that may sound, then they don't know why they're not invested in making the changes that need to be made. And I'm amazed, even like you're much younger than me, even your generation. I know people that they don't recycle anything and they have like single-use plastic. You go to their house and they've got like piles, like they're buying their juice, in those single, like, why is that happening still? And especially the younger generation who is really, for the most part, a lot of you are very passionate about this and more purposeful. And it was just amazing to see that. I wanted to also do a little shout out because Nigel, by the way, says,
I see him.
Yeah, he says, "Go Lilly." So
he's been so supportive of our work. So yeah, people like Nigel and all the folks that are like Nigel out there are awesome.
Yeah, he's cheering you on for sure, for sure. So, but yeah, so let's talk about what you mentioned a few things in terms of government, what they, from a government standpoint, from a business standpoint, from an individual standpoint. What are these barriers? Like, why are we not further along? So we've got to look at the other side of it, right? Like, why is this not happening the way, it's logical, right? And everybody likes going, even for the very simple, perspective is everybody loves going to the beach and seeing the beautiful beach, but like, why are we not taking care of that beautiful body of water that we love to go visit?
Yeah, it's a really important question to look at the barriers, because if you don't have an understanding of that, how are you supposed to address it? And I believe that there's a few big barriers that we need to address. One being that we don't necessarily have a culture in North America. This is like just focusing on North America, that really honors environmental stewardship and environmental protection. If we had a culture that honored that, it would be reflective in our government policies. It'd be reflective in our educational institutions. Right now we go into schools, we talk about plastic pollution and climate change, but in a lot of schools, these things aren't mandated. It's not prioritized in all structures of our society. So if it's not prioritized in the structures of our society and all the ways that we are governed and participate in daily life, even access to waste management, how do we expect that people are that's going to trickle downwards and impact people on the ground? Countries, we see in Europe, like Norway and Sweden, that have like super strong regulations. You'll be fined if you litter. They have super strong waste management where like anyone can access it. And there's like strong deposit refunds for bottles, which is also another great solution. You see that they have a stronger culture of again, really caring for the environment and having this reciprocal relationship. So I think that's a really big part of it, is working to shift the culture, and that needs to happen at all levels. Another part of it, I think, is that, big corporations and big industry are super powerful and they don't want to see issues on this. The Canadian Plastics Industry Association, love that one. They have a vested interest in continuing to increase production of plastics. They don't want bans on plastic items. They want the emphasis to keep being on the individual and on, let's just fix recycling, which, as I just mentioned, is just a false narrative. It's a big myth and only part of what we need to have happen. And so that's why I really believe like we need to put more accountability and responsibility onto corporations, make them accountable for the pollution that they create, and put strong regulations into, create that accountability. Because right now, I think so much of the narrative is on individuals, and it's like, yeah, individuals just give up plastics. That's going to solve the problem. And it is a part of it. You know, you look at the amount of coffee cups consumed in a day globally, and it's mind blowing. If everyone was able to use a reusable mug, it would make a big difference. So I don't want to discount that. But at the same time, when the narrative is just solely on people, it negates that responsibility away from corporations. They're like, yeah, you know, grow your carrots, you know, could stop using straws, but that's just a tiny part of it. And, you know, a lot of the time, people's ability to participate in pro-environmental behaviors like living zero waste, it takes a lot of, you know, sometimes time, resources, also money. You know, it's a privilege to be able to go to a zero waste store where things are more expensive and it takes you more time and you can carry around all your items, your reusable items. You know, like the cheapest food is packaged in plastic. So for folks that are marginalized, you know, lower socioeconomic communities, BIPOC communities, it's going to be harder for them to participate in this. And so I think that we really need to shift this whole like zeitgeist of this issue to be like, okay, wait a minute, like let's look at this from a broader perspective here, really take into account access and justice and who's really the biggest contributor of this, because it's not individual people. Most of like, when you look at what's going into the oceans, a lot of it is from industry. A lot of it is single-use plastics that cannot be recycled and have no end of life plan. So I think those are really the two big barriers that we need to keep working on is, you know, working to shift the culture as well and have regulations be reflective of that, and also working to put that onus on corporations and big industry and having regulations also reflect and facilitate that.
Well, and you have the UN sustainability goals,
Yeah.
and you know, and that's great. Is what's interesting is that you look at these 17 goals that they've set out, pretty aggressive goals, okay,
Yeah.
for 2030.
Oh.
And you look at it and you say, okay, so how are businesses going to measure their progress in that area? So one of our guests on this show, Smita Mishra, she created a platform where it would help. So what they do is they assess and they measure and they help businesses measure their progress towards those sustainability goals. So like to what you're talking about is if it's more expensive and they don't see the incentive and all of these things, then they're less likely, or if they're incentivized to actually continue to produce plastic because that's how they make money, and plastic that's non-recyclable plastic, because why couldn't they develop something that was recyclable?
Exactly.
And reuse that, and so continue with to have their market, but to actually offer a different type of product. But coming back to these sustainability goals and this idea of measuring is how are businesses measuring their progress, even to know where they're at. And I think that's where we're going more and more towards is, you know, don't just tell us that you're doing good, show us, and even show us like, you know, I've seen on certain websites, for example, you know, talking about becoming carbon neutral. Okay, so how so, right? Like, so like how many, and I know some websites and companies that are doing that and saying, when we do this, it equates to this many trees planted or this many, and it reduces our carbon footprint by X, you know, and they're starting to go towards that so that it's measurable so that consumers who are interested in supporting businesses that are doing good for the planet, well, they'll actually be able to identify them more effectively, which is really important. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done in this space. And, you know, the thing is that it's like your organization is doing it their way. Other organizations are doing it, and it's all coming together so that we can create a shift in consciousness, a shift in perspective around this topic. Now, for those that are listening, by the way, if you're tuning in, please, if you have a question or comment for Lilly, please drop it in the chat box. We want to hear from you. But let's talk about the you mentioned about, for example, so there's the reduce, reuse, and recycle, and I've heard that for long, like since I was young, since I was, you know, in school still.
Yeah.
And they were talking about it back then. And when I was listening to you, it's really what really came evident to me is the order of those things. So reduce, reuse, and recycle. So, or you're reusing, reducing how much waste, and recycling. Can you talk about, like, let's say for somebody who's listening and saying, you know what, I'm with you. I mean, yes, I believe we need to do something about this. There are people, by the way, that I know don't even know, they don't recycle because they aren't confident that it's actually making a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I know people like that as well.
So where do they begin? Like in terms of becoming part of the solution, they can purchase product, they can go to these, zero waste stores or whatever. They can do that. What else can they be doing if they really wanted to get involved in this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to bring it back to the R's, which there's like 12 of them now. It's like it just keeps expanding. It's like you really want to refuse plastics as much as possible. Like, what do you really need? And is there an alternative that works within the scope of your budget and resources and time? So refusing, then reducing, and then reusing what you have. So if you have a plastic item, that you can reuse it for another function. I remember my mom like using yogurt containers for all of her like paints and like mixing her paints. And that was like, it was all yogurt containers. Like that was all she friggin' used. Reducing and, redesigning, really working to redesign the plastic products and packaging so that they have less. And then, as mentioned, recycling. But there's also, as I mentioned, repair, refurbish, remanufacture, and those actually all come before recycling as well. But for folks who want to get involved, I think taking a look at your own life is always a great place to start. It's obviously your most central. You have yourself and your daily life, and how you navigate it in terms of like, when you go to work, what are you bringing for your lunch? Are you using a reusable mug? Are you relying on takeaway coffee cups every day? Like, what are some easy switches that you can make in your life right off the bat? And so I think that's a great place to start. And once people start on a trajectory, once they start making those changes, studies prove that they want to do more and more. So I think once you're able to make some of those lifestyle choices, you can kind of expand outwards and, look at your workplace. Maybe your workplace wants a sustainability lead or needs a sustainability committee, or you see some changes that can be made. You can start making those changes in your workplace, whether that's for a business, industry, institution. You can also look at what's happening in your local city or your local town and really see what policies are there to address waste and plastic. Again, we feel like that's a really powerful part of the whole equation, is this creating systemic change. And so using your voice as a citizen to tell public leaders, who are ultimately, they're servants for people, for what we want. What we want is action on these issues that are, threatening our collective well-being, to say, we want strong plastic bans. We want strong policies that are going to curb plastic pollution and keep materials in use and shift to the circular economy, as I've been discussing. Then you can also join onto organizations, like Greenpeace is a great one that's always calling out corporations. They've called out Starbucks, Tim Hortons, like all this. Actual thing behind me, this banner, is when we did a brand audit with Greenpeace, and it was looking at who are the top brand polluters that we're finding. It's like, the typical Starbucks, Nestle, McDonald's, yada, yada, yada. So joining on to like hold corporations accountable and like don't shop from the big corporations that are polluting. Again, McDonald's, Amazon, Unilever, these are massive ones that like they are massively responsible for the amount of plastics going to the ocean. Like Amazon, there's a new study by Oceanic that's come out, and it's like, I forget the amount, but it's exorbitant, the amount going into the oceans like every minute just from that one multinational. So again, being part of holding corporations accountable is another really big one. And again, if people like don't have the ability to create that lifestyle change because, they don't have clean water or they don't have enough money for food, and they have a little bit of time to make their voice heard by like lobbying the government and by making their voice heard to businesses and corporations. And that's also really massive. And I would say arguably more important for really turning the tide on this.
You mentioned about Sweden and Norway.
Yeah.
I saw something probably about a year, maybe even 2 years ago, about the recycling plant that they have. I believe it's in Sweden. And they ran out of garbage and they were having to get garbage just to keep it running. They were having to get garbage from other countries. I don't know if that's true or not, because
Yeah, it's
you
true.
can't believe everything you see on social.
Yeah.
But 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 can you talk about you? Obviously, you must be familiar with those types of plants. I'm thinking that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Why don't we have them here?
We do. Well, you're in the United States, but the United States has them as well. Canada, we do have waste to energy plants, but it's more of seen as an interim solution. Like it's better to be, it's great to be creating energy out of these items that can't be recycled. But then once it's incinerated for energy and it creates that energy, it's done. It can't be used again. And as much as there's information saying there's no pollutants or byproducts made from this, that's false. There's still pollution and byproducts made from these processes. So it's an interim solution, but ultimately, like, we need to keep materials in a closed loop, and we need to be radically shifting to clean energy for our power sources. And so it's another big part of a circular economy is having it's underpinned by this transition to renewables, because burning our waste is not a sustainable renewable option. It's non-renewable. They're fossil fuels that still have, unfortunately, adverse impacts. And you look at some incinerators that I don't think are actually burning waste for energy, but they're just burning the waste to get rid of it instead of landfilling it. And that's posing obviously massive problems for the atmosphere and releasing more carbon. But most of these incinerators in North America are located near marginalized communities, again, primarily Black, Indigenous, people of color, lower socioeconomic status communities. And so they are disproportionately impacted by these plastic plants, which impacts their respiratory systems, increases risks of cancer, like a whole host of health ailments, which is like particularly dangerous right now, COVID, with a virus that impacts your respiratory system. And so that really shows us like the environmental racism involved in plastic across its whole life cycle from beginning to end is with incinerators. So yeah, to answer your question, long story short, for the waste to energy, it's an interim solution, but ultimately, like, we need to radically shift the system to keep materials in use.
Yes, I think of Kelly Mason, who's also from BC, and she also met her through Nigel, actually, and he's a big advocate, of course, for positive change in the world, and has also been on this show. And so with Kelly, she's helping to pave the road. She's got her pave the road nonprofit and also a business that is Green Pavement, which is building roads out of plastic. But to your point, it's not necessarily like that's great. And obviously, I think we should definitely be doing that for so many reasons, what they're doing there, which is an amazing organization. And we've got to reduce how much is actually being created so that becomes ultimately not unnecessary at some point. So you're passionate, you're young, you just got accepted your master's degree, that's your next stage in your journey. So what's your plan? Like, if you in your life, if you could, and it's a big question, but I'm going to put you on the spot here and say, if you could do anything and you say, okay, I've got my life ahead of me and I want to make a difference in some way, what would it be?
I guess at this point, to make my job obsolete, which is a funny thing. Like, ultimately, I'm here to eradicate my job as a campaigner, but it's like that comes back to that famous quote by Oscar Wilde, progress is the realization of utopia. As we're always progressing, there's always probably going to be a need for campaigns and environmental action, because we're always learning more and we've got a lot of work ahead of us. So yeah, in my life, yeah, it's a really good question. Like, I love so many aspects of working in the environmental movement. I'd like to really become more of an environmental writer. I'd love to be a CEO or executive director of an environmental nonprofit. So that could be a Surfrider Foundation one day, maybe. Right now, the Canada BC chapters, we're all part of the United States system. So our headquarters is in San Clemente in California. But right now we're in a process of looking at potentially affiliating from the US and standing alone. And that way we can open more chapters across Canada, and we would have like our own independent system like Surfrider Australia or Surfrider Europe. Because as it stands, we can't open more chapters in Canada. So working towards that and making that happen. And if people want to support us in making that vision a reality, I'd love to chat more, because it's really powerful. We have people from the Great Lakes, the East Coast, other parts of BC who want to be part of this movement. So I'd really like to continue growing that, because I really believe in the mission of Surfrider and its investment in individuals as environmental leaders, and really giving people the tools and access to be part of this, which is so powerful and increases the quality of people's lives and gives them education, and gets them stoked to be like, you know what, actually I can make a difference. Every person who has the resources, time to do so, they can. So yeah, I'd like to really continue pushing for that, and just be the best change maker that I can be. I'd love to be like Zipporah Berman or Naomi Klein. Like, I just look up to them, and they're just so brilliant with the impact they've had on the environmental movement with their books and their journalism, and how they've again really been part of this cultural shift in our understanding of the movement. So that's my ideal. I'd love to be like Naomi Klein.
Hey, you know what? One day, that's the beautiful thing about podcasts, because they're evergreen, right? So they're out there. So one day,
I like that.
You'll look back on this and say, I remember when I said, and here I am today, and I'll want your autograph. So, but here's the website for people to go to, pacificrim.surfrider.org, if you want to learn more. Is that also the best place that they can go, if they want to support your cause in terms of being your own entity in Canada?
Yeah, that's right. We've just launched our Surfrider Canada website, which is canada.surfrider.org. But if you go to Pacific Rim, you can get my contact there. You can donate, sign up to volunteer, sign up to be as an expert. You should become an expert on Surfrider. You'd be great.
I have a lot of learning to do, I think, to get myself up to speed. But
great. We need media experts. So so there's lots of ways for people to get involved. So definitely check it out. And I haven't had time to talk about it, but we have tons of different initiatives that are all really inspiring. And we've created resources for people to bring these to their communities. So we have an ocean-friendly portal, and that's been supported by Vancouver Foundation for, giving people resources for ocean-friendly businesses and vacation rentals and schools, and, their own, like, rising above plastics in their own lives, lobbying government, like all kinds of templates and, the whole 9 yards. So definitely recommend that people check that out, because it's a wealth of information and resources that we've created for people. So
awesome. Yes, absolutely. And you also have a website, your own website, lillywoodbury.com. And for our listeners and viewers, if you want to go check out what Lilly is doing from a broader perspective, even beyond Surfrider, she does consulting. And so I highly recommend they check that out as well. So this has been great, Lilly, and very eye-opening. I'll tell you, one of my favorite places to go is the beach and the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. I've always loved the water. Growing up in Toronto, I lived near Lake Ontario. Even when we were living up north, I lived on a lake or river, which emptied out into a Lake Simcoe. And I just always knew that I wanted to live by large bodies of water. And so living here, I live like 15 minutes away. I love going there. It's one of my most favorite places to be. And it's so relaxing and refreshing. And there's nothing worse than, walking along the beach and seeing garbage and or seeing it float up from the oceans itself, or seeing the wildlife that is damaged and or like completely destroyed by the impact of our negligence, I will call it, in terms of just or unawareness or lack of awareness in terms of what the consequences are. There's cause and effect in everything that we do. And so understanding the effect of what we're actually doing. So I love what you guys are doing. One of the guests that we had on our show, he since passed away, but such a passionate man. He actually, Ulrich, he did beach cleanups, and he was so passionate, and he called it zero debris. And he actually turned that into a he was in 4 countries. It was the US, Philippines, Mexico, I think, and then Nepal, which Nepal doesn't have any oceans, but they were doing something else similar there in terms of cleanup. But what he was doing was and I think the organization is still continuing through the people that he has inspired and continue to pass on the legacy. But he talked about zero debris. He said taking it beyond just cleaning up beaches, but having it be a way of being, a way of life. What if we lived our lives with zero debris? And so it was such a profound thought to think of like zero debris, negative thoughts, negative habits and so forth, and start to live more conscious. And the impact of that, again, coming back to not just behavior modification, but shifting the way that we show up, the way that we see the world. I'm a big believer in this show that, and transformation to me is about transforming the way you see yourself, the way you see others, and the way that you see the world around you and your part in that, right? And so seeing yourself differently causes you to, and seeing the world differently and seeing others differently causes you to think differently, do things differently, and prioritize things differently. So, which is what you're talking about. So I love it. It's great. Thank you so much for being here. And I should actually say that if anyone is looking for more episodes like this, you want to hear from, I mentioned Kelly Mason and certainly Ulrich and Nigel Bennett and a number of others. We've had over 365 amazing guests on this show. Go to leadersoftransformation.com. All the episodes are there. And you can actually do a little search. There's a search field that you can use and type in an area of interest, and the episodes that relate to that will pop up. So again, Lilly, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate what you're doing, and good luck on your continued journey as you go for your master's degree and continue to make a bigger difference in the world, because I know you're gonna make a big splash. So pun intended. That's very cliche, but anyway.
Thank you so much for having us and supporting Surfrider Foundation. Hopefully we'll do this again sometime. Maybe I can interview you at a certain point as well once we get a Surfrider Foundation podcast started. I want to hear more about your journey as well. So thank you. It's great.
That would be fun.
Now.
That would be fun. That would be fun. All right. You have a wonderful day. Keep doing what you're doing. We'll talk to you soon then.
Thank you. Bye now.
All right. Thank you.